Good evening. Thanks very much for joining us on CNBC TV 18 special programming, Recharging Renewables. I'm Shireen Bhan. Today we turn our focus on India's renewable energy landscape. The government has set itself an ambitious target of installing 175 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2022. Since 2013, the renewable capacity in the country has grown more than 80%, currently at 70,000 megawatts. So what exactly will it take the government to achieve its Vision 2022? Remember, issues like tariff cap at auctions, lack of standard guidelines for the bidding process, lack of strong laws to enforce that discoms don't violate the power purchase agreements are some of the issues that currently plague the sector. The Confederation of Indian Industries, that CII, has come out with a list of recommendations on how these issues and a host of others can be tackled. We discuss all of that and more in the next 30 minutes. Joining me, a power-packed panel: Rahul Munjal, the Managing Director of Hero Future Energies; Sumant Sinha, the Founder, Chairman and CEO of Renew Power Ventures; also with us, Ashish Khanna, the Managing Director and CEO of Tata Power Solar; and Pratik Agarwal, the Group CEO of Sterlite Power Transmission. Gentlemen, appreciate you joining us here on the program. Sumant, let me start by asking you, just a broad report card of where things currently stand for the renewable energy landscape. A lot of progress has been made, but the concerns now seem to be that are we heading in the same direction as we did with the power sector for the renewable energy sector as well? Are we looking at a situation where we are going to be left with stranded assets?
Well, the short answer, Shireen, is that we are doing reasonably okay. I think we've made a lot of progress in the last several years. The government was very ambitious and gutsy in some senses about setting the target of 175 gigawatts that you talked about earlier, at a point when our total installed capacity was only about 30 gigawatts. This is back in 2014. And we made substantial progress against that target. Today, we have 70 gigawatts now that are installed and commissioned. We have another about 15 gigawatts that have been auctioned. So about 85, so we're about half the way towards our target. And just looking at the momentum that we have right now, we probably should be getting to about 130, 140 gigawatts.
Okay.
Anything depending really on what the government does in the next couple of years in terms of further moving towards the target. So I think all in all, we've made very significant progress. Having said that, to answer the question that you just brought up, there are some concerns as well. And those concerns are particularly dealing with the low tariff situation that we are finding right now. The difference between us and the conventional sector is that a lot of the stranded assets that took place in that sector were as a result of either PPAs not being there or fuel supply issues. Now, those are problems that don't really plague our sector, because obviously we only install projects once the PPAs are in hand. And fuel obviously is not an issue in our sector. But
a violation of PPA is a concern. So while PPAs may be in hand, is a violation of the PPA, the contractual obligations, a concern today?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think categorically I would say that none of the discoms are talking about cancelling any of the PPAs. And I think any talk in that respect is alarmist in nature, and it's actually not accurate at this point in time, because no single discom that I'm aware of is looking at cancelling any of the older PPAs. These have all been bid out. Most of them have been auctioned off. They've been allocated through a transparent mechanism. And therefore, there is really no reason to go down any path in terms of looking at moving away from these PPAs. So I think the PPAs are strong. They're solid. As I said, there is no fuel risk issue. So I think at best, some of these projects may end up giving lower returns for some of the people who might have bid very low tariffs. But I don't see any stranded assets getting set up. I don't think that is an issue in our sector, at least.
So not an issue just yet. Would you agree with that? That we're not looking at that possibility just yet. But if some of the concerns that have been flagged by industry are not addressed, could that be the eventuality?
I think, like Sumant said, if you have ultimately it's a utility business, you have an asset, it has its PPA secured, the fuel is dependent on the weather, not on individual companies. I don't believe that there could be stranded assets to the size and tune you saw in coal. I believe, yes, that as always in the case of auctions, there will be the one-odd bidder that is too aggressive, and that asset could go under. But I don't believe it will happen to the magnitude that you've seen in thermal or any other sector.
So what's going on as far as auctions are concerned? And Rahul, let me ask you that question, because in total, 3,900 megawatts of solar auctions have been cancelled between January to November of 2018, and only 1,000 megawatts have been retendered. So what exactly is the problem? Is it again back down to tariff?
So, absolutely. So let me just talk about that. You know what's happened? We all loved for the tariff to fall from 5 to 4 to 2.44, which was great because, at low solar tariffs, solar becomes, or wind becomes, renewable becomes mainstream energy, and everybody wants to buy it. So we like low tariffs. But then what happened, government went and capped it at that. At the same time, the interest rates went up, rupee depreciated to wherever it is now. And other than that, we got safeguard duty in for 30%.
Yeah.
So all that put a pricing pressure. So 2.44 for a project which was done 8 months back is very different than a project that we're bidding out today at 2.44. So I think the cap that they put is not good for the industry at all. And some of the players who are bidding is extremely aggressive.
Okay, but you know, this is a recommendation that you've all clearly made to the government that remove the tariff cap, but so far it hasn't found much resonance within government. If this were to continue, what is the outlook then as far as being able to achieve that, you know, 2022 target?
See, Shirin, if you look at it, as on date, everyone is bidding, and everyone has also been bidding very aggressive. But when we are looking on a long-term perspective, yes, it could be the impediment on that stage. As on date, there is a cap which has come through certain calculations which are going through. But it is not right to first have a cap and then have a reverse auction too. You know, generally, you have a feed-in tariff as a regime. So the industry is looking for a feed-in tariff which can be given, or there is a reverse auction process which can go across. I think the calculation of the cap and using it, that calculation, then to have further lowering the tariff is a system which has been utilized by the government, which is working so far. You know, at the end of the day, the industry is still bidding. The only point is some of us are going overtly aggressive. And that is where we have to see...
Who are the some who are going overtly aggressive? Let's name names here.
You know, everyone... See, let's understand that anyone who is bidding has certain assumptions in it. You are based on certain assumptions for the next 25 years and for the next 2 years when you are building the project. There is assumptions with respect to the foreign exchange. There is assumption with respect to the inputs cost, which is coming across. And a lot of it is coming on the imports. On those assumptions, everyone is then bidding. Till date, if you look across in the last 23 megawatt, which has already been under operational, there is nothing which has gone wrong.
Okay.
However, having said that, we are looking for another 4 times of it. Why don't we have the maturity level and then work as an industry which is more mature?
Okay, there's been no accident yet, and perhaps that is why the government says, what's wrong? Why shouldn't we continue to do as we have done and you know, keep the tariff cap? Because at the end of the day, we want to benefit the end consumer. We're not here to try and benefit the private power sector.
No, I think there's more reason to be optimistic. I think we're looking at the last 3 or 4 years. And if you take a step back, the next 3 or 4 years of the power sector look different for several reasons. First reason is if you look at the power consumption growth in the month of October, it's 11% year-on-year growth.
That's right.
Some states, non-election states, have grown at 30% year-on-year growth. Right? This hasn't happened in 2 or 3 years. So when the sector is improving and more power consumption is happening, I think that opens up doors for everybody in the sector, including perhaps for the government to say that some time ago, 2 rupees 40 was my cap, but maybe 2 rupees 80 could be okay, as long as power consumption improves, right? And more people are willing to pay a little bit more for power. And peak prices touched some 12, 13 rupees recently, right? So I think we must remember that the last 3 years were definitely so-called bad years for the sector, close to 0% growth in some years, and that's changing almost dramatically in the last few months.
Okay, are you as confident or as optimistic? Do you believe that we are going to see a change in the dynamics purely because we're seeing demand go up?
You know, we have to make sure and ensure that this carries on for a little bit longer. I think if power demand continues to grow over the next 6 to 9 months and perhaps even a year, I think that will bring in a different level of confidence. Right now, the issue is that everybody is factoring in 4 or 5% growth. Discoms are procuring on that basis. They're making their plans on that basis. And so, yes, if they feel that there is going to be more growth and therefore they have to start procuring more, that is going to change their mindset. So that certainly will be a very significant underlying change if that begins to happen. And that will therefore lead to all boats rising on the tide. I think, having said that, there are a number of other things that need to be addressed in the power sector as well. And in the CII recommendations that we've given to the government, those are the things that we've talked about as well, which is that, you know, first of all, the grid needs to be really improved because you can't actually have a grid which is operated in the way that it is today and have more than 15 or 20% renewables getting fed into it. You need to actually expand the ability of the grid to absorb more power. You need more transmission lines. You need better software to manage the grid. So that is an area that the government can really work on without really impacting any of these issues that we talked about earlier, which is around pricing and so on. So those are neutral issues that we really need to focus on a lot and make sure that enhances the absorptive capacity of the grid to take on more renewable energy. So that's one thing that we need to work on. The second thing that we can work on is things like demand-side management, moving more and more of the consumption towards renewables. For example, the solar pump scheme that the government is thinking of coming out with, that's a very significant change in terms of trying to move a lot of the demand from the grid directly into the solar sector at a distributed level. So like that, there are many other interventions that can take place, which can also look to modernize the grid very substantially, look to green the grid very substantially, and which are not controversial in nature. So there are quite a few things that the government still can look at doing.
Okay, so you're talking about the neutral interventions, the non-controversial interventions that you believe the government should take. But Rahul, let me come to you and ask you about prioritizing for us the immediate interventions that are required. I think tariff cap, there is consensus on the panel that perhaps is topmost of the industry's agenda, whether or not the government does anything about it. So far, no indication that it will. But in terms of priority, what are the interventions that you speak?
Yeah, so there are a few other things that the government needs to do. I want to first clarify, most of the things in renewables are still preemptive. Like whatever you're talking about for the thermal sector, it's not all doom and gloom. What we're saying is we have ambitious targets. Let's get there. And this is what we need to get there. So the sector is not going anywhere. Sector is here to stay. It's got healthy growth. But our targets are very, very ambitious. Having said that, one of the biggest elephants in the room is the DESCOM health. And even the Electricity Act, the bill that's there, that talks about carriage and content separation. So let's get that bill in. As soon as the next government comes in, whenever the government comes in, I think one of the first priorities would be to make that an act, because it's a very well-written act. And almost everything gets covered there.
This takes me back to the interview that I did with the now Power Minister when he took office, and he said that this was going to be his priority and he would get this done immediately. And, it's been, more than a year now, and there is no indication that it's going anywhere. So let's see whether that does, in fact, go through.
Absolutely. So that's one of the things that we'd like to see happen. And something that's irritating most of the players today in the industry is the payments are due from DESCOMs, and they're getting due much longer than they should be. We've gotten used to 30 days, 45 days, 75 days. It just keeps on extending.
What is it currently?
It depends. There are certain states which are really good, where it's online.
What would the average be?
I would say average would be about 4.5, 5 months today.
4.5, 5 months.
Yeah.
Okay. In terms of intervention, and I'll ask you, because one of the specific recommendations I think the CII has also made is the fact that there should be at least a renewable purchase obligation on part of the government to try and give impetus to this sector as well. Would that be key to ensuring what Suman talked about in terms of the grid, etc., and what Rahul also said, managing the supply-demand dynamics and evening it out?
I think it's right, and I think it's still there. What we have to see is whether it is implemented or not. I think there are one other factor which Sumant mentioned, and I would like to highlight it out there. It's that there are other ways. Currently the utility scale projects are getting all the optics, and the tariff is becoming the talk of the town. If you look at what India needs, we need power, we need energy, and then you have solutions like rooftops, and you have schemes like KUSUM, which also helps the agriculture sector, and in the same process help the farmer to export the power to. Stabilizes the grid is one part, technical part of it. I think there is a lot which is possible in the current regime on the technologies which are available, which can also be progressively in that manner. We have been overtly aggressive on the utility scale. Today we have come to a level where we are competing. But I don't think so there is a point of competition in this between fossil fuel and renewable. Both should exist, coexist, should align. And the focus towards the rooftops and the focus towards the scheme like KUSUM can be a big changer for this country. At the end of the day, if you look at what we need, when you increase the per capita consumption, these are the ways you can easily get your power.
Assuming that it continues to be capped, the tariffs, and it is at about this 2.44 per unit, which is what we're currently seeing, what can be done on the cost side to ensure that these tariffs are sustainable? I'll do a sort of quick round across the table, and Sumant, I'll start by asking you, what can be done on the cost side, whether it's taxes, GST, we talked about inputs going up, the rupee depreciation, of course, it's now started to appreciate again, but what can be done on the cost side?
Well, first of all, the price cap by itself is fine, provided you have a proper price cap, right? If the price cap is very low, then that's the problem. So, and the issue is that...
So 2.44 is too low?
So 2.44 was not the price cap. The price cap was a little bit higher than that, but it was still very low. And the issue is that if you keep it very close to where the market clearing price might end up being, then you'll always have a situation where some people will not be able to bid because it's too aggressive for them. And then you're always leaving it in the hands of people who are not operating in the markets on a day-to-day basis to determine what that tariff should be. And that rather than letting the competitive auction process determine what the right tariff, the market clearing tariff should be.
And it's being determined then, I would imagine, from what you're saying, is by risky capital, so to speak.
That's right. I think what ends up therefore happening is that the capital that is willing to take the most amount of risk is the only one that is willing to come in at those tariff levels. And so you end up having, instead of having a broad, sustainable amount of capital coming in, which is what is required to meet these huge targets, where we need all sorts of capital, whether it's institutional investors, insurance companies, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, private equity funds, domestic and international, all coming into the sector. Instead of that, you just end up having that capital which is driven by people or owned by people who are willing to take the most amount of risk. And at some point, those risks don't necessarily go in your favor all the time. Sometimes they may not go in your favor.
And then it becomes a problem with the banks.
Exactly. So then it ends up being a situation where banks are left holding the can. And so that's why that's not the kind of behavior that the government should really be incentivizing and pushing for. But that is unfortunately what ends up happening if you keep price caps which are very close to where the actual market clearing price might be. Because you may get it wrong, right? Because the market is a dynamic situation. Interest rates change. So to come back to address your question, what can be done? The biggest issue by far is interest rates. Those have the biggest impact on our
I don't think the government can control that.
No, but they can't control that, obviously. But what they can look at doing is, giving us some kind of schemes where, let's say there's some sort of FX hedging mechanism, which the previous minister had talked about and tried to put in place. If you're able to borrow in dollars, for example, not have to hedge it fully, hedge it only partially, that will allow us to bring the cost down substantially. So those kinds of interventions are certainly possible. And then, of course, there are interventions on the capital equipment side, which goes towards taxes and so on. The government can decide that this is a priority sector, and therefore we need to bring taxes down to zero on this sector instead of 5 or 18% where it is right now. It's a little bit unclear in some cases. So those kinds of interventions are possible as well to overall bring the cost down. But to my mind, tariffs are already fairly low. So that's not where the problem lies, actually. The problem is to get acceptability on the part of the discoms. And I think that is where you need to have enforcement of renewable purchase obligation targets, because that is how the sector really got to this point. So for us now to take our foot off the gas as far as RPO is concerned, even though tariffs are at 250 or 270 or wherever they are, sub 3 rupees for sure, I think that's really going down the wrong path.
Okay, yeah.
Just to add to both of Suman's points, one question is, how do you make the tariffs lower? Second question is that even at these tariffs, how do you get discoms to buy more actively? I think those are the two questions.
And why isn't that happening? If tariffs are this low, why do we actually not have discoms buying, and why do we not have the enforcement of the RPO then?
So just the first point, I think if you look at India's energy bill, 70% of India's energy bill is already exposed to the dollar. Now you're slowly substituting that energy bill, which is crude oil and fossil fuel and gas, with electricity. So if you're used to being exposed to the dollar, what is the harm, for example, to have some dollar PPAs, like the way Sumant is saying, and just encourage the sector? By the way, dollar PPAs, you could look at maybe a 30% reduction in the tariffs. That's what's happening in the US at the moment. So that could be one solution. Coming back to your question about why aren't discoms finding this price attractive? I think the real issue is that this power that's available, let's say solar power, is available 6 to 8 hours a day. They then have to add to that 2 rupees 60 paisa, 1.5, 2 rupees, 3 rupees of capacity charge that they have to pay to either their own thermal gencos or to NTPC or to some other gencos, right? So I think altogether they're saying this is 5-6 rupees. And by the way, I'm already making a net loss on my every unit that I sell to my consumer because of the heavy theft of 30-40%. Recently, you saw that the states that have implemented highest rural electrification and household electrification are also the same states where the theft has gone up. This is a serious problem in our country. Till we don't fix this, you're not going to fix anything. So coming back to the point, can the government create an incentive system to now drive firm renewable power? Can we really incentivize huge amounts of energy battery storage to go along with the power and say, can we get firm electric power, if not at 240, maybe at 350? That perhaps is more palatable to discoms to support all the incremental demand as opposed to 240 for just 6 hours in a day.
Okay. So, Ashish, I'm going to give each one of you the final comments now. Priorities and what would your chief concern be today for the health of this sector?
I think, first of all, let me go back to it, that when we are talking about the cost and the cost reduction, at least in this industry now, we have to look at a total cost of ownership. Look at it that that plant has to work for 25 years, not on a transactional basis, whatever Excel sheets today prove as a point of returns and the debt cost of it. And I think when we will look into it, the aspect of quality will come into it. And I think that's a major factor which we have to see across these installations. You know, if we complete 100 gigawatt, we are virtually covering one Switzerland with our modules as such. I think it is important that we talk about the quality and the cost if that quality is not being met as such. On the priority sector, I think I will again say that while looking at the quality of the products, again, like Prateek said, we are exposed now to the foreign exchange vagaries. If we have made in India, if you are looking for this sector for next 25 years as a renewable factor, a push towards the made in India, which can to a large extent can mitigate that risk of having foreign exchange vagaries out there, will be a great help to the country. It will generate employment. We will have the quality of the products which we need out there. I think that is number two.
Specifically from the Make in India perspective, what more is it that you would like to see? I mean, we've got the safeguard duties, etc., to some extent being put into place. So what exactly is it that you would like to see?
You see, if you look at today, the safeguard duty, the ground reality is not helping the manufacturer to the extent. So it was the right intent for the manufacturers, but the way the tariffs has been passed through and the way that the new bidding is happening, which is giving a window of 21 months for the project to be executed, there is very little which a developer will like to ask from the local manufacturers on that factor. So I think the intent was right. The operational wise, we have to take it off. The second intent is we have to work on the rooftops. Again, when we look at 100 gigawatt, 40 gigawatt of that was rooftops. Today we are lacking behind.
What's the deficit? What's the deficit today?
Huge. We are into 1:5 now. We have not even reached 2 to 5 gigawatt against that. I think it's a good distributed generation. We have the technology now. We need the power out there. Let's take it forward.
Okay, Rahul?
Yes, I think to your question, we should go back to the government's vision of 175 gigawatts. Let's break down that vision into yearly plans as we had done earlier. We haven't met those plans, that's okay. Let's replan those plans. Let's actually tender out 10 gigawatts or 12 or 14 gigawatts that needs to be tendered out. Whatever impediments are there for tendering that out, let's figure that out. Who will buy the energy? Which state is going to buy the energy? You know, we need to go down to that level of detail and not for 1 year. Let's do it for a 5-year plan. The problem is we're an infrastructure industry and we're planning bid by bid. I don't think that's the right way to go about it. Let's today have visibility of what's going to happen over the next 5 years so we can arrange our funds accordingly. We can arrange the competencies needed in the country accordingly.
Funds a problem today? Accessing funds a problem today?
There's a two-part question. A lot of the debt was coming from NBFCs. So all the project finances which are supposed to close in between last month and the next 4 months will definitely see some heartburn.
Okay.
So that's definitely going to be there because NBFCs are going to go slow. And if they're going to go slow, they'll of course go slower on the renewable sector as well.
Okay. So that's a concern at this point in time.
And as far as the equity goes, I think there is more than enough equity all over the globe who's still keen to invest in India as long as India is able to deliver.
Okay. 30 seconds, Sumant, final side.
So look, I think that in general, the sector is not in a bad place. I think there are some temporary issues that have surfaced right now. I think those will be addressed because there is a fairly healthy dialogue between the corporate sector through CII and the government. And I think all of these issues that are there right now will therefore get addressed. And I think the sector will come back, perhaps not, as I said earlier, to achieve the 175 gigawatts, but will certainly make a fairly good attempt at getting to close to that level. But as I said, the government really needs to broad base what they're doing, and the focus from the utility scale side should also expand much more to the distributed side, and we need to therefore see a lot more happening on many other sectors. But the DISCOM financial health, very, very critical.
Well, DISCOM financial health is a cause of key concern. Tariff caps, unfortunately, out of time. So my apologies, Prateek. Tariff caps are cause for concern. Much more needs to be done on rooftop solar. A lot more needs to be done to incentivize Make in India for the renewable energy sector. More interventions needed to try and look at the cost issue that the sector is grappling with as well. Some specific recommendations being made. Perhaps not a bad idea to revisit and rescale the targets that have been set for 2022. With that, it is time for us to wrap up the CNBC TV 18 special Recharging the Renewable Energy Sector. We'll see you again from all of us here. For now, goodbye. Many thanks for watching.